So it's a little tricky, but you want to make sure that your gussets on the other side are exactly lined up. So the easiest way that I've seen and kind of played around with is using a square. And that way you can line it up exactly where it needs to be. And then what you can do is use a couple of clamps. So I'm just going to lightly tighten that one down. Put one right here. And then what I can do is still move it around slightly. Looking for. That looks good right there. Looking good. Clamp it down, and we can drill some more holes. So I have on the other side, there's a couple of holes. If you remember, we put rivets into a couple of them. There's the two holes on the outside that we've drilled up to 3/16, which are these two outside ones. So now I am going to drill those out to 3/16 as well. Okay, so our final bolt size is 1/4 inch. So what we're gonna do now is take a 1/4 inch drill bit. We're gonna start our top hole to 1/4 inch. Okay, and what we can do now is take our drill bit all the way down. We should be able to look right underneath and be lined up with our hole in the bottom. And you can start slow and you can kind of feel it. want to guide into place. And this will make sure that our bolt can go straight through. So now, hit it with the deburring tool. And on the bottom, you should be able to put a bolt all the way through. And these will eventually be finished with the nylon nuts, but for now I'm just going to put a castle nut on as kind of a temporary solution. So I will finish out the rest of these holes. So what we're going to do for the next ones, we'll get this one and this one to 1/4 inch, and then we're going to need to drill out our rivets from the bottom and do the same thing for these holes. All right, so we've been making a mess, but you can see I have all of the holes drilled on both sides of the square tubing and all of the gussets, and they are all up drilled to 1/4 inch. So what I've been doing now is basically just going through, I took it all apart and I have been cleaning up all of the tubes and all of the gussets. Like I said before, you want to make sure that all of your holes don't have any burrs. So I use this little burr removal tool. All it takes is just a couple of turns. You don't need to go too crazy with it. And then you can either take a file and get inside there, or take this other burr removal tool and fit it down inside and get the inside of the holes as well. And then what you're going to want to do is, I've tried a couple different ways, but in the end, I basically just used some 220 grit sandpaper and a sanding block and just hand sanded everything down. It doesn't need to be a mirror finish, but you're going to want it pretty smooth. You're going to want to get rid of all of the major scratches and major burrs, because ultimately what you want is, when you bolt everything down, you want a good surface between your gusset and the square tubing, because that is what is going, when you apply that clamping force, that friction in between is what's going to provide the frame all of its strength in all of the joints. So you want that as flat and smooth as possible so you can have the most surface area possible in contact between your gusset and the square tubing. So I will continue onward, and we're getting close to having a complete frame. So one other thing that I'm doing as I am putting the frame together, the plans call for 3 12-inch long pieces of this Delrin material. It's like similar to what you would find in like a cutting board. So where this goes, this is the top tube. I've put in this one already. So we need to add some supports at both places on each end where the wings will attach. And they basically just slide in, and then you can drill the holes in them. And then that just gives it a little bit extra strength where the wings attach. And then this one will go in the front where the motor mounts. I'm gonna wait to put that one in, just because depending on the motor that I will put in this, the mounting may change. So I'm just gonna hang on to this until that point. But yeah, you can just get these at like McMaster. It's just like 1 1/8, or no, what was it? 1 3/4 by 1 3/4 square. It came a little bit larger than 1 3/4, so I took like a 32nd or a 16th off just with the table saw, so I can get it to slide in. But that's one thing that I'm adding before I bolt the frame all together, just so I don't have to take it apart and do it again when I get to that point. So let's talk hardware for a minute, specifically the bolts and washers and nuts that we'll be using on this plane. So here is the type of bolts we are going to be using. So it's kind of a glare. This says AN4-32. So the AN, I believe, stands for Air Force Navy. So these bolts have been specifically made for aviation use. They're a little bit different than your standard hardware store bolt, like grade 8 or like grade 5. They're a lot higher strength. They have better tensile strength. But in this case, you'll notice, so the AN4, the 4 is the diameter of the bolt in 1/16 of an inch. So AN4 is 4/16 or 1/4 of an inch. The other bolts we're going to be using are AN3s, which are 3/16 of an inch. And then the -32, the 32 is the bolt length, and that's the length of the shank. So the shank is from where the bolt head stops all the way to the end of the threads. So the 32 is the length in 1/8 of an inch. So 32/8, that would be 4 inches of the shank length. So the ones that we're using for the frame are AN4-26, I believe. So that's 26/8. So that's, let's see, 3 inches plus 2/8. So 3 1/4 inch shank length. So yeah, that's just kind of the naming system of these bolts. You'll notice that these ones have been drilled in the end, and that's so that we can use a castle nut like this and put a cotter pin in there. And then the ones that aren't drilled, like the ones we're using for the frame, we can use a nylock nut. So that has that little locking nylon insert that we can torque down, and it'll basically lock itself in place. So the general rule of thumb for using bolts is that you want that smooth part of the shank or the grip to stick out completely. You don't want to have your threads inside the hole. So in this case, we're going to use a washer. So if I put a washer on there, you can still see that the grip is still slightly sticking out. So in this case, we need to use 2 washers. So I think the maximum number of washers that you want to use is 3. So if you have to use more than 3, that means your bolt is too long and you should find another size.